All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be another entry into the What's Beef series. And, of course, this edition will be featuring Mr. Ryan Clark and also his former teammate, the superstar wide receiver, formerly of the Pittsburgh Steelers, now with the Oakland Raiders, by the name of Antonio Brown. And, you know, brothers, sometimes in life, and we have to be very wary of this, because sometimes issues occur, particularly amongst so-called black men, for no reason whatsoever. And you have to really monitor that spirit within you, that there's just something about him I don't like mentality. That's not something that's a part of manhood. That's not maturity. Sometimes there will be a particular aspect or characteristic in someone, or maybe an energy that you might find to be unsettling. But then it's up to you to do your due diligence and figure out, am I bugging out, or is this person actually as off as the energy is that is resonating from him? You might start a new job and there might be someone there who just does not like you for some reason. It would behoove you to try to stay away from that person. I know that I've been through that in my past, where there was a particular person who might not have liked me just off jump, off GP, for no reason whatsoever. I always try to stay away from those type of people, because you never know how things can go from bad to worse. Or sometimes somebody thinks they don't like you at first, and then they come to the realization that they were just bugging out. So, you know, we have to scrutinize that spirit within us whenever we find that energy starting to wash over us of, quote unquote, not liking somebody just because of an initial feeling. Things like that, that's not conducive to a productive environment. And I bring all that up because that seems to me to be the issue that occurred between Ryan Clark and Antonio Brown. I could be wrong about that. And sometimes in life, two people, their energies just don't mix. It's a major part of maturity to be able to put a little frivolous bullshit aside and try to keep your mind focused on what matters. At the end of the day, it's not someone's job to be who you want them to be. It's their job to be the best person that they can be as they see it, as long as they're not transgressing the laws of the land or the laws of the Most High. That's the most important thing. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Antonio Brown took offense to you mentioning his name in a tweet, and he came at you last night. The former wideout inferred a confrontation between the two of you the next time you two meet.
Right. Let me say this very quickly. I like Ryan Clark as an analyst on ESPN, but there's no doubt in my mind that he's been trying to use this Antonio Brown issue to try to garner more acclaim and attention for himself, especially on ESPN. Every time there's a story about Antonio Brown, he pops up to talk about how bad of a person he's always known Antonio Brown to be. So I do understand why finally Antonio finally spazzed out on him for continuously mentioning his name on social media.
Right. What's your reaction to AB's tweet?
Well, obviously, I replied, you know, and looking at it now from the side, and I'm gonna take it back a little bit. Before I retired, there was this whole thing on First Take, and it was kind of media versus athletes, and you know, Stephen A. and I actually kind of went back and forth about some things. And that night, he called me. Right, he called me.
AB called you?
No, Stephen A. called me. And we had a conversation, one, about African-American brothers and being in the limelight and doing what we do and the way that we approach each other and react to each other. And so there's been things Antonio has said about me that I've ignored for that reason. I've ignored them because I don't want them to happen publicly. I don't want that to be anything to happen outside of me trying to do my job. When you play football the way that I played it, and being somebody who people felt like was lesser talented, I was able to play because when it came to having a flight or fight response, I had no flight, right? If it was a small hole and it was Marshawn Lynch and he was coming out, my thought was, I'm going to split him in half. And so when I see that tweet, my first thought is, all right, if that's what you want to do, I can't wait. But
oh, boy. It's very obvious that these two, they just, you know, they have some contention between one another. They have a problem, and it's one of those things where, you know, just put the boxing gloves on and go 5 rounds and let the best man win. And at the end, y'all can hug it out and go y'all separate ways. Because it's very clear that's what the problem is. The problem is that Antonio Brown is someone who also seems to have come out of nowhere, but he was able to ascend to a level of superstardom in the NFL. Ryan Clark, as he stated, he's kind of the opposite. He went to a major SEC school, that being LSU, and he was drafted into the NFL, I believe, by the Redskins. He ended up on Pittsburgh. He shared the defensive backfield with the great Troy Polamalu, and he was never considered quite the weak link, but as he has already stated, he was considered someone who was not as talented as some of the other members of those great Pittsburgh Steelers defenses of the late 2000s. At the end of the day, I think that sometimes, especially in these locker rooms, when you see someone who comes from a small school and all of a sudden they're sent to a high level and then they start talking shit about how great they are, that can offend someone who has to get down and dirty just to keep his job, like a Ryan Clark. So do I believe that there may be a little bit of jealousy there between Ryan Clark and Antonio Brown, or from Ryan Clark to Antonio Brown? It could be a tidbit of that. But at the end of the day, I mean, come on. Y'all got to do better than this. I mean, this silly shit. And he's talking about how Antonio Brown has mentioned his name numerous times before. He's ignored it. No, bro. You have mentioned Antonio Brown's name primarily, and sometimes Antonio Brown has responded. He has struck back because y'all just don't like one another. But 95% of the time, you've mentioned Antonio Brown's name first. I'm not even quite sure if Antonio Brown has known you've existed since you left the Pittsburgh Steelers, other than when you mentioned his name.
But having to understand in retirement, I have to be different than that. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not embarrassed. It's exactly what I thought. I was actually looking forward to it. I would rather it have been, he saw me somewhere, he told me he wanted to catch a fade, we caught it, and we lived with life.
That's what y'all need to do. Just get in the boxing ring and handle y'all business. I mean, y'all both over 30 years old. Ryan Clark damn near 40. Antonio Brown, what, 31? Y'all handle your business, and that'd be that.
Like faster, like fast forward. If I had a way for it to happen, if that was something that had to happen, I would rather it be that way, because now you involve everybody, right? Now I have to get on TV.
Well, first you involved everybody, bro. You involve everybody. And Antonio Brown decided to respond. Brothers, that's why I say, when you have that spirit that jumps on you, that, oh, there's something I just don't like about this nigga type spirit, you have to monitor that. You got to moderate that within yourself. Because 9 times out of 10, it's not that person's issue, it's your issue. So you have to monitor that aspect of who you are as a person. Like, why am I annoyed by this person? Is it because they're actually the asshole that I think they are? Or is it because I'm just easily irritated by certain types of personalities? Sometimes different personality types don't mesh, and that's a part of it. And when you know that you have maybe a laid-back personality type and someone else has that loud, overbearing, overly gregarious personality type, you have to know how to marginalize that. That's why me personally, I like to work by myself, because I need to focus. I'm a creative type individual, and I can't be around too many people who are overly interested in trying to garner attention for themselves by being loud and boisterous. There's a time to be loud and boisterous, but in the workplace environment, I can't really deal with that. So understanding that about myself, that's one of the reasons why I realized I had to extricate myself from the corporate environment or that corporate world. So I can only imagine in a locker room where you have so many different personality types and you have to be around these people for the course of the season. I'm sure that you're going to have clashes there.
And talk about it, right? It stemmed from me doing my job and doing my job in the way that he felt threatened him in some way or that he was upset about. And I get that.
Bro, you were not on TV talking about Antonio Brown as a player. You were on TV saying Antonio Brown is not a good person. You were making personal evaluations about Antonio Brown. That's just a fact. So your distaste, your acrimony for him was coming out. That is why he started to go back and forth with you.
But for me to reply in that way, for me to basically accept the challenge, I think I should have handled it a different way. I would like to say that I've grown to a point where I've gotten better in that. But for somebody to come at me, I'm going to respond. He tweeted later that he claimed it was Tony, not AB, tweeting. Those are the same people to me. But he talked about
right. But what was he actually acknowledging? He was saying that he suffers from multiple personality disorder. And you're seeing that more and more among celebrities claiming to have quote unquote alter egos. They're really talking about the demon or the dark aspect of their personality type. He's saying that he suffers from multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, i.e. he's under demonic possession. That's what he's saying. That's why you hear people like Beyonce talk about Sasha Fierce and these other notable figures in the entertainment world. They name their other personality.
About having love for my son Jordan, which he does. They had a relationship. He spoke about me babysitting his son. You know, when Antonio Brown got to the league, he was taking care of a young son. And what I saw was a young dude who had been through a lot, who was trying to do the right thing as a father. You know, and we threw birthday parties and we paid for him and we did these things. And so sometimes those...
Okay, so where did the separation happen? If you guys were doing all that stuff, you were babysitting his kids, you guys threw birthday parties together. So where did the separation happen? Did it happen when he got paid and you thought that he got a little bit too big for his britches, and then the Pittsburgh Steelers let you go? Was that it? Because I'm trying to figure out, where is that line of separation or demarcation where all of a sudden you went from being buddy-buddy with him to being someone who's on national TV saying that he's not a good person. And maybe he's not a good person, but I just want to get to the foundation of where, you know, where that cataclysmic event occurred, where you decided that you were going to get on TV and rehash a lot of those bad moments near the latter part of your tenure with the Pittsburgh Steelers, because I do believe that that has a lot to do with some of the antipathy between you and Antonio Brown. I think that you're resentful towards Antonio Brown, that you thought that he was just some kid from a lowly school, Central Michigan, I believe it was, where, strangely enough, Antonio Brown went to Central Michigan and one of his teammates was J.J. Watt. So it's very rare that you have two of the top players at their position in professional football both attend a school that small. But just to get back to the point, I think that there are some things that you're not acknowledging about yourself, Ryan Clark. That's all I'm going to say. And by no means am I trying to be an advocate for Antonio Brown, but I have to go to where I see things start. You've gone out of your way to get on television and talk about Antonio Brown and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's very obvious that you were trying to dime out certain people who you had an issue with during the latter part of your time period there. You had an issue with Antonio Brown, and he has never said anything about you first, but he's always responded.
Those personal relationships and the emotion involved in that makes you feel like when somebody moves on to do a different job, they should protect you in a different way. And that I also understand, which is why I don't respond to a lot of the things he said, because I believe they sometimes come from a place of hurt or misunderstanding. And so in this, you know, whatever happens from it happens. I think I should have handled it in a different way, because it was the day that 32 kids got picked that got to realize a dream, and I have to get on TV and talk about tweets between me and Antonio Brown.
Right, but bro, wasn't nobody thinking about you on draft day? The reason why you're on this segment right now is because you work for ESPN. You frequently make guest appearances on First Take, and the fact that an athlete, a major athlete, was going back and forth with you is almost like one of the quote-unquote gods deciding to engage in combat with a regular person, because you're not an NFL player anymore. And this is something that many of these sports talk shows or sports debate shows do. They troll these major athletes, and then when the athlete finally throws them some crumbs, they want to make a segment or two out of it. Once again, do not get on TV and try to act as if all you've done is your job and Antonio Brown is being sensitive. Because we both know that you've never spoken about Antonio Brown and his ability to play wide receiver in a critical way, because you can't. You can't critique him as a wide receiver. Every time that you've mentioned his name, it's always been a critique of him as a person.
Let me say what you can say. Okay? And I applaud you for handling it the way that you handled it. You see, Will, Max, and a lot of folks outside of the black community, let me tell you something about the black community. There's this understanding that we have amongst one another. And the brothers, particularly in here, if they disagree with me, feel free, but you won't. Anybody could get got.
Well, everybody knows that, including you, Stephen A. Smith. Especially with that big-ass forehead you got. Imagine somebody put a dot on your damn forehead. They'll never miss.
That's a saying that we say. Anybody can get got. The reason why it's important to make that statement is, of course, Ryan, myself, and others, we're professionals. We're on television. We have a responsibility. We don't just represent ourselves. We represent the network, etc., etc. We ain't trying to get into anything like that. But the reason why it's important to just tell you what the mantra, what the mentality is, guys.
You can tell Will I'm up on it.
I understand that.
Max Kellerman said, you can translate that for Will. I grew up in the hood with Negroes.
But the reason why it's important is because on many, many occasions, there's a little secret that goes on that y'all may not be aware of. You got cats who are professional athletes, who are black, that come at anybody in the media who's black. Because their belief is excuse me, you're supposed to be down with us. Hell with doing your job. Your priority is supposed to be protecting us. That's their mentality. And a lot of times they're asking you to ignore truth, to ignore what the human eye is seeing, to ignore the responsibility that you have of doing your job, because your priority should be looking out for us. And where people like Ryan, myself, and others, Prime Time, Playmaker, and others, Hall of Famers, mind you, brothers that are in this business, that are on television, that are licensed to give their opinion, where we...
Well, I got to stop you there, Stephen A. Smith, because you tried to correlate your assertions and your critiques with Deion Sanders and people like Shannon Sharpe and Michael Irvin. Those are Hall of Fame football players. So when they critique someone based on their performance on the field, that's held to far higher esteem than some of your critiques about basketball players. And I do think that a lot of what you're saying is valid, but I'll counter with this. I think that what many basketball players and professional athletes in general, what they get upset about with certain black pundits on the national airwaves is when they start levying personal attacks against them, especially pertaining to things that they know nothing about, particularly when you decide to cast aspersions or go off on tangents just based on hypotheticals or meanderings and no facts. That's what they get upset about.
We find it offensive is that if it was somebody white, they got nothing to say. But when it comes to us, they not only disagree with us, they want to get volatile with us. Now, for the record, let me say this about Antonio Brown, who I...
Well, Steve, is it just the black media personalities that they want to get violent with? Or is it just that maybe you feel more sensitive about it because even though you're projecting this image of the athlete that wants to be protected by you, maybe it's you who wants to be protected by the athlete. Maybe you're frustrated that there are a lot of high-level black performers in the NFL and the NBA in particular, who don't want to give you exclusives. And you're upset by that, and you're projecting this notion that they want you to protect them, when in reality it's the reverse. You want them to protect you. You want them to give you the exclusive. You want them to have these sit-down interviews with you. And that's why you're so protective of people like Carmelo Anthony and Kobe Bryant, so on and so forth, because those are the few high-profile sources and plugs that you have in the NBA world. LeBron James won't sit down with you. We know that over the past few years, you've had certain fallings out with Floyd Mayweather, where you've had to approach him and try to get to the bottom of why he went public with some of his statements against you. So it's a catch-22. And it's always going to be a tenuous rapport between the prominent black athlete and the prominent black media member, because they're both trying to survive in the entertainment industry.
I believe for the most part is a good brother and obviously an all-world receiver. If I had to bet my money on a fight,
Take the safety.
I'm gonna take the safety.
Wide out.
Okay, let me be clear. But it ain't gonna come to that. My biggest issue is why? For what?
Look.
What was said about you that's so reprehensible that, by the way, you have...
Steve, you know what was said. And for you to get on TV and act as if you're incredulous to Antonio Brown's, his antagonism towards Ryan Clark, I mean, it's just silly. At the end of the day, we know what Ryan Clark has stated about Antonio Brown on the national airwaves. He said that he's not a good person. That's what he said. Now that might be true. Who knows? That might be true. But for the average person to be called not a good person, unless they're a serial killer, they are going to try to rebuff that.
You haven't lived up to. Since you've been gone from Pittsburgh, you called out Big Ben. I've been told that Big Ben had tried to reach Antonio Brown on several occasions, okay? And Antonio Brown ignored his text messages.
Because he's done with him, Stephen A. Smith, that's why. And he probably does not trust Big Ben Roethlisberger. You have certain people like that. They give you a particular amount of rope, just enough rope to hang yourself. They give you chance after chance after chance. You continue to try to play them, and then after a while, they just cut you off. And then you have other people that the first time that they believe that you've infracted against them, they want to talk it out. And then the next time they want to talk it out again. And then the next time they want to talk it out yet again. And then finally they reach the end of their rope and there's this huge, big combustible event and there's a falling out. And then you have other people who they're going to continue to let you try to demean them. They're not going to say anything. And then one day they're just going to cut you off permanently. And Antonio Brown seems to be the second personality type. He's done with Big Ben Roethlisberger. You notice he didn't try to go back and forth with Big Ben in the media while he was in Pittsburgh. He just imploded and then exploded and left, and that was that. Once Antonio Brown is done with you, Kawhi Leonard is another personality type similar to that. Once they're done with you, they're done. And there's not going to be a reclamation. There's not going to be a rebuild.
You got other players speaking up and getting out of pocket and saying things they shouldn't say. In your defense, Antonio Brown got his money. He's out of Pittsburgh. And still, you find yourself in a situation where you're causing this kind of trouble.
Here's the problem. Like when Derek Carr got mad at something I said, right? And he felt I questioned his heart or was out of bounds.
That's a great example because Stephen A is trying to just hone in on the black man issue. There was another occurrence where Max Kellerman was critical of Derek Carr, and Derek Carr challenged Max Kellerman to a bout in an MMA octagon.
Bounds. He challenged me to fight in the octagon, right? Now, I don't care where you're from, what community or what your neighborhood you come from, what your background is. Once you're at Antonio Brown's level and you've been around a while, you have to know you can't publicly threaten somebody. And the way he came at you was it's on site. But then the way you're explaining it now makes sense because, like in boxing, two stablemates, two guys who came up together and wind up fighting, sometimes those are the most vicious fights, right? Because they know one another. They sparred against one another. Because they got deep feelings about it. But even if he has deep feelings about it, like it's family and you feel betrayed or whatever, you can't. Antonio Brown continues to behave publicly in ways that are unacceptable. It's not okay to.
Well, dude, he's already told you that he has multiple personality disorder. That's why he said there's Antonio and there's Tony. What do you think that means? The cat needs mental help. He needs spiritual help. That's why he has these issues like down in Florida where he was throwing furniture out the window and it almost hit and killed a child, things of that nature. Many stories that people have not or might not be aware of with Antonio Brown.
To threaten some.
And the fact that he's a Luciferian. The guy walks around with 2 gold rings on his hand. So he is a venerator of the Baphomet.
Somebody publicly on Twitter saying it's on site. And by the way, as Stephen A said, safeties make a living hitting wide receivers. That's how they make a living. I want to move on to the draft. I'll just say this, man. What I'm hip on, what I'm not, I'll tell you this. I know about individuality. I know about a man, and you did your job as a man. You told your truth. That's all you're supposed to do out here.
Well, no, that's not exactly true. As a media member, your job is to report the facts. It's not for you to tell, quote unquote, your truth. If you're going to tell, quote unquote, your truth, that's just your perspective, and that could be clouded based on personal issues between you and that person. So that always has to be qualified. Whenever a person is giving you their observation on another person, and that's why I always say, I don't take people's advice or recommendation about another person. They can say, well, watch out for this dude because this is what he's about, and so on and so forth. But you as a man, you have to be sharp enough and acute enough in your mind to know that every person has to be vetted over a process of time. So when someone else comes to you, when a third party approaches you and says, watch out for Antonio because Antonio's like this, and that. Antonio might go on to become your best friend, but he was the worst enemy of this other person, this third party, because their personalities just did not mesh. There was a clash there. But you might go on to become best friends with this person. So this notion of a media member telling, quote unquote, his truth, no, that's not valid. Your job as a media member is to relay as many facts as possible. And that's why I've stated that the main bone of contention between Antonio Brown and Ryan Clark is that Ryan Clark has never once made any professional critiques of Antonio Brown. Every time he's spoken about him, it's always been from the personality aspect, the fact that he just does not like him. He called him a bad person on national TV. That's what Ryan Clark has done. And whether that's true or not, you can't sit back and just totally be shocked when Antonio Brown wants to come back at you or respond to you in a personal way. But anyway, peace.